let's get into today, okay? So we're going to continue with our Chapter 3 topic. We're moving into finding percentages. Again, go into your OneNote, course information, calendar, and today's lesson is here. I'll put those questions at the top there. If you want to maybe start working through the questions while I explain, may be helpful for you, but let's get into the notes. Okay, so a percentage is a good way to standardize and compare quantities. You guys in here are all after your test scores, okay? And it's a really poor example of what you should be focused on. However, it's a really good example for this topic. So let's say we have 2 scores. Let's say one of them is 14 out of 20, and the other one is 54 out of 75. Well, these are let's say two test marks for 2 different classes, and you want to know what one you did better at, but you can't actually figure it out from there. So we want to know which one's better. Which is better? How's a good way to figure that out? Well, if I calculate the percentage, it's a number which I can go, okay, it's higher or lower. That's an easy example. So for the percentage of 14 out of 20, we should know that that is equal to 70%. Okay? For 54 out of 75, well, that is equal to 72%. Okay, so we can know that 72 is higher. And so 54 out of 75 is the better score. Comparing 2 quantities are much easier when we use percentages. So use percentages to compare things. It's really just what we're talking about, because it's just that out of 100. Percentages are always out of 100. So who's got the better value out of 100? First, we should know how to express a quantity. So how to express a quantity as a percentage of another. So to express a quantity as a percentage of another, the first thing we should do is write it as a fraction. So if you had 13 out of 15, you would write 13 over 15, and then times the fraction by 100. Because that is how we convert to a percentage. For example, if there are 33 girls in a class of 50, what is the percentage? Okay? Well, the first step is to always write it as a fraction. So 33 out of 50, I can write that as 33 over 50. That is my fraction. And then my next step is to multiply that fraction by 100 there. So multiply by 100. Now, if I multiply by 100 and I have that 50 there, I can cancel out that factor. that becomes 2, and that becomes 1, which makes our answer a whole lot easier because it now just becomes 33 times 2, and that is equal to 66%. Okay, always try and cancel out our factors because it makes the multiplication a lot easier. Now, that is how to find the percentage of one quantity out of another, but you could also have a percentage of a quantity just on its own. So 15% of 64, for example, would be a question like that. So to find a percentage of a quantity, first step is to write the percentage as a fraction or decimal. We know that fractions and decimals are interchangeable. We've been working on that for the past week. So I could express it as a fraction or as a decimal. Either one would work, whatever's easiest for you. And then multiply the quantity by said fraction or decimal. So let's have another example, e.g. 20% of 70. So I want to try and find 20% of 70. My first step is to write the percentage as a fraction or a decimal. So 20%, that's like writing 20 over 100, which then goes to 2 over 10. And if I have 2 over 10, I could also write that as 0.2. Now, just because I used a fraction in my first example, I'm going to multiply by a decimal here. So I've got 0.2 times by 70, which is equal to 14. So that would be my percentage, my 20% of 70. I'll do the fraction way just for the working out as well. So 2 over 10 times 70. Fractions are much easier to do without a calculator. So you can get rid of that. So that becomes 1 and that becomes 7 because you're taking out that factor of 10 out of both the 10 and the 70. So then it becomes 2 times 7, which equals 14. So you see you get the same answer no matter what method you choose. But just do whatever is easiest for you. I'm not going to tell you that there's an exact way to do it because all correct methods will get you there. So a couple of examples now. What is 34 out of 40 as a percentage? So as a percentage, how do I find 34 out of 40? So this goes back to our first step. So this is how to express a quantity as a percentage of another. We're finding a percentage of another. So 34 over 40 is my first step. Then I have to times that by 100. Okay. Well, let's just cancel out the factors of 10 first. So get rid of the zeros. So then we have 34 over 4 times 10. Well, now I can also take out a common factor of 2. So I can get rid of the 10, put a 2 there, sorry, a 5 there, and then that with a 2. So now it becomes 34 times 5 over 2. And now you can do this in two ways. You can divide 34 by 2 first and then times by 5, or times by 5 and then divide by 2. 34 times 5, 5 times 30 is 150, plus 5 times 4 is 20, so 170 divided by 2, which is equal to 85%. So that is my answer for the first one. Next example, find 33% of 186. Now, we're not trying to find the quantity one, we're trying to find the percentage of a quantity without any indication of otherwise. So we need to change this into a fraction or decimal. Now, if you turn it into a decimal, you will use a calculator. So I'm going to turn it into a fraction just because that shows us the method in which we do it without a calculator. 33 is the same as 1 over 3. We should know that from how we remembered figuring out our recurring or terminating decimals lesson. So 1/3 is our percentage, and we're going to times that by 186. Well, that just becomes 186 over 3. And we know that 3 times 60 is 180. And then we know 6 times 3 times 2 is equal to 6. So if we just add those two numbers together, we know that 186 divided by 3 is equal to 62. Okay. So we now have done this topic. Okay. All the questions are listed at the top, and then check back in tomorrow for the next lesson.